finds a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy 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 copy. Deja vu.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone, discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 24, titled Long Live Walter Jameson. And Long Live Walter Jameson originally aired on March 18th, 1960. It was directed by Anton Leader as Tony Leader. It was written by Charles Beaumont and stars Kevin McCarthy, Edgar Stelly, and Estelle Winwood.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
suddenly up ahead.
Just cross over. You're moving into a land, another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, and here's Rod Serling's opening voiceover from Long Live Walter Jameson. You're looking at Act 1, Scene 1 of a nightmare, one not restricted to witching hours and dark rain-swept nights. Professor Walter Jameson, popular beyond words, who talks of the past as if it were the present, who conjures up the dead as if they were alive. In the view of this man, Professor Samuel Kittredge, Walter Jameson has access to knowledge that couldn't come out of a volume of history, but rather from a book on black magic, which is to say that this nightmare begins at noon.
And from IMDb, the description is: a father forbids a history professor from marrying his daughter when he discovers that the captivating lecturer is actually an immortal who has lived for thousands of years.
Talk about burying the lead.
Yeah, that's a good point. That although right off the bat, I want to say Sam, the father that they're talking about right there, Professor Sam Kittredge, I think, is my favorite character in all of the Twilight Zones that we've seen so far. I love his character. He's a dope. Right. I like the fact that, so I actually just recorded an improv tip today talking about how in even your craziest things, craziest scenes, craziest sets, you need to find like the reality, like the relatable thing. And the reality of this was Sam loving his daughter and trying to protect his daughter from this immortal professor, who, by the way, Kevin McCarthy I recognized him the second he popped up on screen from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers from the 50s.
Which you've talked about several times on some recent episodes.
I have. So he's very memorable. But Sam is this just loving father who is trying to protect his daughter from this guy. And I'll let you, I have a lot of things to say about this episode. So go ahead. I know you wanted to jump in there.
Well, while you're on Kevin McCarthy, maybe this speaks to the different viewing experiences we had of stuff growing up. As soon as he came on screen, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know this guy. And I was trying to place him. And the first thing I thought of was Niedermeyer in Animal House. And it's not him, but he has the same kind of like condescending sneer all the time.
Totally.
Which I thought was a great casting choice because, it's really hard to like this guy. And I mean, because of who the character is, but also just like his look, he always just looks kind of like snobby. I don't know.
Definitely.
He's not terribly likable, which I thought was a great choice because it's not clear early on if he's going to be the hero or the villain of the story. And I thought it set up well for what's going to end up happening to him and for him, for us kind of taking Sam's side.
He also has that to tack onto that. He also has that very like East Coast accent to it. Like, the judge from Caddyshack, they're like very like, I'm talking this way the whole time. I really liked him. I really like him as an actor and I really loved him in this, but I totally know where you're coming from.
Well, and so where I had to then look it up, and as soon as I saw the filmography, I'm like, oh, I know him as the evil station manager from UHF, the Weird Al movies. And that's what I was thinking of. So I like that you went to the classic Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I went to the Weird Al movie.
That's what I recognized him from, but when I looked him up, 100%. That's the second thing I knew him from, was from UHF, which is, by the way, one of the greatest parody movies from one of the greatest parody songwriters, or let's just say the greatest parody songwriter of all time.
I don't think you need to qualify that one. Like if you say parody songwriter, coming
Weird
up
Al.
with a list beyond Weird Al, and there have been other ones.
Dr. Demento, I believe.
Tom Lehrer.
Yes.
But I mean, come on. It's Weird Al and then like 8 steps down to the next level.
100%.
Also, Kevin McCarthy, I just want to share, I don't know if it's just my own personal experience, but I've known a lot of people named Kevin McCarthy. It's a very common name in my life. So I'm just sharing that. I did not go to school with this guy.
Yeah. You could have, though. He would have continued living. Well, until we got to the end of this episode.
Yeah.
So
there was a pile of dust sitting in the corner of the classroom.
When I looked at Kevin McCarthy, when he appeared on screen for the first time, and yes, I recognize him as the Invasion of the Body Snatchers guy, but you know who he completely reminds me of?
The guy from UHF.
Yes, also that. But Powers Booth, Curly Bill from Tombstone. He looks, he looks just like him. He has that sort of very like kind of commanding presence to him, and I could not get.
So I think of Powers Booth from 24, and I can't remember if he was like the president or vice president. He's someone high up in power and is like super sleazy and evil, of course. But no, they totally. In fact, I'm thinking of how Kevin McCarthy looked in UHF when he's older, because that was like 20 some years after this. And like if you would have put a picture of him next to a picture of like Powers Booth old, I might have guessed that they were like the same person or the same, like the same person 10 years later or something. They really look a lot alike.
And you throw in a little like face mashup from the judge from Caddyshack, and then you've got exactly whoever you come up with is basically the three of those guys all at one.
You know what? Powers Booth has the same sort of look in his eyes, and he has the same mouth and jawline and like mouth expressions.
Yes,
that's totally.
That's a great. Yeah, they kind of are a little bit. I mean, they're good looking men, but they're like kind of wild eyed good looking, which is why Powers Booth probably always played a shady guy. Like he was great in Deadwood.
And they also just always look a little shady or up to something. Yeah. Like it's hard to imagine them like playing the like straight up hero part.
I think their nostrils are sort of always a little bit flared too. Maybe as part of it as well.
Yes, anyhow, Powers Booth is one of the best names of an actor ever.
Yes, it's amazing.
Credit for that.
I just wanted to point that out before we move on.
Can I point out that the priest who married us was named Kevin McCarthy, but it was not this Kevin McCarthy?
Was this Kevin McCarthy? He would have probably when did you guys get married?
We probably would not have legally been married, because I assume he would have been up to something and, impersonate. He like had the priest tied up in the back of the church or something. It was just impersonating him.
Tied to like a train track or something.
With a Snidely Whiplash mustache.
Exactly.
Like, I'll get you. Yeah.
So I'm surprised that you don't like this character more, because he used to, as we learn about this character throughout all of his lives, this guy ended up in the Civil War. And when they ask him what he did before the Civil War, he was a lawyer, which is my profession, who becomes a professor, your profession. So I thought this episode should hit a little bit close to home for the two of us.
Well, and you hated being a lawyer, and maybe I have loathing on my own profession, so I hated him because he's a professor. I don't know. Yeah. Speaking of being a professor, the very opening music of this scene, I just really liked. It's like this establishing shot of just some people walking away from the camera between two buildings. It could be anywhere. It could be a downtown, could be a main street. They could be going into an alley to beat somebody up. I have no idea. But they put this, like vaguely pomp and circumstance music on, and you're like immediately like, oh, it's a college and they're college students going off to class. I just thought that it was a great commentary on the power of the music to tell you how to read the image. Then we go into the class, and so I know Sam Kittredge turns out to be a professor sitting in on the class, but there are other old people in the class too. And I was super confused. I'm like, is this continuing ed he's doing or something? It was very weird.
well, Twilight Zone ages. The guy from last episode was 36 years old and he looked like he was 100. So, but that, speaking of Niedermeyer.
They were all 22, but some of them look like they're in their 80s.
Right. Speaking of Niedermeyer, that opening music, I thought the same thing, reminded me very much of the music from Animal House. And,
yes.
and it was that, you're right. It's very college-y music. It was perfect. I thought it was a great choice.
Yeah, no, and I haven't noticed the music. You know, I do work on sound, but I tend to focus on sound effects and mixing and stuff like that, and not a ton on the music. And right away, I'm like, oh, this is such a great use of music to tell us where we are.
Yeah.
And yes, Animal House, another great film. Everyone should see if you haven't.
Of course.
7 years of college down the drain.
One of the things that I loved about Sam, the other professor that you mentioned is sitting in on his class, and this whole episode in general, I kind of was guessing where it was going to go, but they didn't really technically reveal it until the end. But I think this was the best episode that I've seen for foreshadowing. There was so much foreshadowing in this episode. There's a shot of Walter. I'm like, what was his name again? It's right in the title. There was a shot of Walter's ring, which we later find out that's kind of how Sam recognizes him. The whole reason that Sam is sitting in on his class is because Walter's dating his daughter, and Sam's suspicious because he had been hired 12 years ago and basically hadn't aged at all. He looks at his hands and he's like, oh, your hands. He's like, our hands used to kind of look the same. They're one of Walter's old wives. We see a shot of her skulking outside of his house long before we know who she is. I thought this was there was a lot of times in the Twilight Zone where I'm like, that didn't make sense. Why was that the thing? And this episode, I felt like predicted everything that I was going to be like, well, that doesn't really make any sense, and solved it before I could even get annoyed by it. I thought it was awesome.
Okay, so this might be one we end up with some differing opinions on.
I am going to heavily go to bat on the ratings for this if you didn't love this episode. So go ahead. I
was going to say, I actually liked the story. I thought the writing was good, and a lot of things that you use the term foreshadowing, where there was a lot of setup and payoff in this. I think that was better than, particularly the last few episodes. We've had several times where someone just kind of has to stop and explain. And there is kind of a long explanation in the middle of this, but it's not it feels natural to what they're talking about, to the conversation. It wasn't like, okay, let's stop and make up some rules about what the heck's going on here. What I was going to say is I actually thought this was one of the worst directed episodes we've seen. Specifically, I liked the performances and what the actors were doing and the pacing of it. I thought the camera shots they chose were repeatedly bizarre or flat out wrong or confusing. To the point where I was just like, what the hell is this director doing? And I was waiting to see at the end the credits. I'm like, I hope this isn't one of the directors we've seen a lot of and we liked. I'm like, no, it's some new guy. Okay.
That bums me out because I wasn't noticing that. And I agree with you on that. Was another point I was going to make. I think this is the best acted across the board that I've seen of the Twilight Zone, at least to this point. And I will also throw in that even though she was very secondary, I think Susanna was probably the strongest female character that we've seen in the Twilight Zone to this point, which is a shame that she's just the secondary character, the daughter of Sam and the girlfriend, I guess, of Walter. But she's going for her PhD in school. She's letting her dad be the cook at home. And she was going to essentially defy her dad to marry Walter despite her dad's protestations. And I was like, that's interesting that we're seeing, in my opinion, one of the stronger female characters that we've ever seen in the Twilight Zone is still, unfortunately, a secondary character. But I thought she was one of the more progressive women that we've seen in the Twilight Zone to this point, in my opinion.
Although then she even gets trumped by the other secondary female character who shows up at the end, who is Jameson's former wife, who is now elderly and calls him Tom, because I guess that's the name he was going by, and shoots him and kills him. So definitely taking some agency there.
True. Good point.
I do, I think Susanna was an interesting character because you're right about some ways being progressive, but also there's this very weird line that Jameson has where he's like, well, you'll be a housewife eventually. And
yeah,
she just kind of, okay, like, yeah, that sounds great. There was a weird sort of thing. And I think that was supposed to be foreshadowing of like him not being a good guy. But it was just kind of very out of left field and almost like the thing like he shouldn't be saying in front of her dad, even if that's what he was thinking.
Yeah, I do agree. And that line did ring in my ears a little bit. But then I also thought, okay, this guy is thousands of years old though. And so, I mean, like it's impressive that he's just not considering her property at this point for considering. And again, you don't forgive. I think there comes a point where you can't forgive older generations from being racist, from being sexist and being all these things, because eventually you have to progress and catch up. But considering this guy was ancient, I was like, okay, well, he's at least like not the worst person, the worst character.
But I guess the interesting thing there, and this is something, nobody has really experienced, so we don't know. There's some idea of kind of getting like set in your ways and like, oh, well, they're elderly and they're just not going to change at this point and they're on their way out. If you're around for 2,000 years, you would have to learn how to adapt, right? What they were doing 2,000 years ago, you couldn't just be set in your ways. And, even by the Middle Ages, like, no, I just bang on rocks and, write on papyrus and whatever else they were doing 2,000, like you would have to get good at adaptation and kind of reading the changes in culture.
True.
The other thing I wanted to mention, because you said that, she was like going for her PhD. And this is not a knock on Susanna. This is, I guess, a knock on the writers. It was just very clear they have no idea what a PhD program entails. Cause he's like, getting your PhD. She's like, well, there's something called an examination. I'm like, that's not how you get your PhD.
Well, did you research and see if that's how you do in 1960?
Yes, because I had professors who went to school in 1960 and that's not how they did it either. You go through a defense, which is, I think in the, certainly American and Western Europe system has been pretty standardized for like centuries.
I don't think though, in their defense, I don't think it was clear. My opinion was that she was a student and that she was going to get her PhD, but maybe that's not the case. But I assumed she was a student at the college, not necessarily that she was working on her PhD at the time.
Well, they said she was 30, so I assumed she had made it to grad school. And then he sends her, Sam, the dad, sends her upstairs like for books and study. That was his line. And like, again, I don't think you understand, like this isn't like you're going in for your final exam tomorrow and I got to review the book or something. Like, I don't know. And that's something that's super niche to just like having been through that and something that most people probably wouldn't care. And it was certainly not central to the episode, but it was just like, what you're describing is not her going for her PhD.
Okay. And anyone that doesn't know, Mark's just trying to point out that he has a PhD. Okay, guys?
Yeah. Call me doctor, damn it.
I refuse to.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I agree. She was progressive and a nice, strong, it was nice to see two strong secondary characters who were women, who each kind of had some agency and made some strong choices. Again, as you said, it's kind of unfortunate those have to be secondary characters, and also that they were both basically there as plot devices, right? Susanna is there basically to give Sam something to get upset about, because it wasn't the issue with the immortality. It's he doesn't want this man marrying his daughter because of it, which we can talk about that. And then, really at that point, it's still unclear whether Walter, like, maybe he takes a wife and he stays with her for 50 years and she gets old and dies and he takes on another one. Or like as soon as they start to get old, he drops them and moves on to the younger. Like we don't know. And so the older wife coming back is essentially the expository device telling us that's what he does. Like he stays with them for 10 years and then like moves on, changes his name and such. So confirming he is in fact despicable. But she was also just there to sort of deliver that plot information and be a way to resolve this. So I thought it was unfortunate that these two characters who do take some strong actions were also both basically there just for plot purposes rather than actually having a developed character themselves.
Okay. I am either going to show that I'm a horrible person or because I saw Walter Jameson as way more tragic than despicable, because and this is another reason in piggybacking off of what you said, that I think Sam is one of my favorite characters in Twilight Zone history, because he specifically asked that question. He's like, so what do you do, Walter? You just hang out with him for 10 years? How long do you stay with him? He's still trying to protect his daughter because she wants to marry him. And the thing,
and Walter doesn't answer.
No, he doesn't answer. But the thing that makes me see him as tragic instead, he tried. He's like, when Susanna was he thought Susanna was falling in love with him. He tried to leave the university. Sam talked him out of it. Sam's like, why didn't you just tell her the truth? And he's like, who the hell? He's like, she's not going to believe it. You're not even going to believe this by tomorrow. And he's like, well, why didn't you just leave? And Walter goes, it was too late. I had fallen in love with her too. So I see him as this very tragic character that experiences these great passions throughout the thousands of years of life that he's had, and he can't resist the love for these women. And he even said to Sam, he's like, I need her now, basically, like, cause imagine how lonely that would be for him. And we only get the inkling that he's lost one kid, but apparently his very first time that he became immortal, he had a wife and a kid, or kids, and he saw them grow old and die. Well, I don't know if he saw them die, because he might have bailed on them too, which, yes, is a despicable thing to do. But I saw this guy as more tragic than despicable.
I think maybe we're more in agreement than you'd think. I think his life, and this is very, it's actually similar to what I guessed, although an entirely different track last time about man becomes immortal, but there's a monkey's paw situation. In this case, the monkey's paw is just like, being immortal isn't all it's cracked up to be. There's not some secret catcher. So I thought his life itself is tragic. I think the fact that this woman is coming back, who he apparently did just like ditch and disappear and go change his name, and he doesn't even recognize her or who she is, like that, it does seem like there's some despicable treatment there. Because the argument I would make is, look, if you're, to kind of be crass about it, it makes more sense to like move on to the younger, newer model if you have a limited lifespan. If you're immortal, like, okay, you can stay with that woman till she gets old and dies, because you have infinite amount of time remaining to pick up somebody else.
That's a good point.
So I do think he's a tragic figure, but he can be tragic and also behave despicably towards at least this one particular wife. And we got the sense from him not answering Sam, and from him kind of making the choice to like go run off with Susanna. And he could have left if he wanted to. I thought his explanation was a little weak.
Okay. And I will counterpoint that one more time. So my dogs are getting toward the end of their lives. They've probably already lived longer than they should have. And so it's hard. Like, I have a hard time in the back of my head, knowing that I'm going to have to say goodbye to them. And there are parts of me that are like, man, I wish my ex had just taken them, or like, I wish I could just drive them out to like, and just let them run free. And like, knowing that yes, they're going to die, but not having to, and that is a very selfish thing of me and a very selfish thing of Walter. But I think the heartache of leaving, I'm sure, was horrible for him. And again, I'm reading into this character, but probably.
I think you're assuming something that we don't have any evidence for, that it was horrible leaving his previous wife.
I think that there's more. I think that there's more of poet in Walter than not. Although there are some really cool lines about. Well, we'll get to that. But, I like, rather than watching them grow old and die, I mean, can you imagine who knows how many times he's been married? Again, that's another question that Sam asks him that Walter doesn't answer, but who knows how many times he's been married? Can you imagine finding the quote unquote love of your life over and over and over again, and watching every one of them grow old and die before your very eyes? I mean, this is a horribly tragic episode, and another episode that Serling's sort of, not obsession, but Serling's fascination with growing old and dying that we've seen time and time again in Twilight Zone. This was the one that hit it on the head just as effectively, I think, as any of them have.
Yeah, I mean, definitely another one in that running theme of death related episodes.
Yeah.
And there were, I thought the conversation between him and Sam was just chock full of I thought some really good lines and points. And to your note about the sort of tragicness of it, and I'm gonna hang on to. I still think he's behaving somewhat despicably, but I think he is also tragic. Sam has this great line about, I assumed that, being immortal, you would just continue to grow wiser and clear, and you don't. And that it's not Walter saying it, it's Sam realizing that Walter has not made any particular jumps. I have to say something I did like about Walter, and this does feed into maybe him ending up being a professor, or the pursuit of knowledge, is when he talks about in his original lifespan before he got given immortality. So when I thought of all the things there were to know and the miserable few years that a man had to know them, it seemed senseless. And I really loved that idea of, so often, the idea of immortality is kind of, in some sense it is selfish regardless, but it's about I'm scared of dying. I want to accumulate more money. I want to do this and that. And there's something to me touching about the idea of, he knew there was so much to learn and the inability to do that. But I thought that was super cool.
You know what, Mark? I'm going to push back on you on my boy Walter, but let's take a quick break right now, and I'll come back and keep defending him.
All right, so we're back, and I was just commenting about that I really liked that Walter was inspired, at least in part, and I do think he mentioned sort of his fear of dying as well, but by the idea of learning more. And he has this second part of the line where he says, "Only if a man lived forever, I thought, could there be any point in living at all." And to me, I thought that was at least this kind of respectable motive for immortality.
And you stole a little bit of my thunder, because I was going to push back on you when he's talking about this kind of selfish thing. Sam points out to him, he's like, I thought, you get wiser as you get older, like you mentioned. And his response is, nope, I'm the same coward that I've always been. I'm still a coward.
Yes, that was a good line.
You just remain the same. And I agree. I do agree. But he's like, I think that's part of what makes him tragic, is that he's so afraid, because, you get this gift of immortality. And I loved the connection between Sam and Walter, that they were both so afraid of dying. Sam now, and Walter thousands of years ago, when he found this alchemist to give him this power to live forever. And
which, can I just say, I kind of dug that whole story, and it's vague enough to not get into weird details and try to make it super specific. But there was a story. It wasn't just I woke up one day and I was immortal, or I went to I've read a book and said a spell or something. I like the idea of this Stone Age alchemist who had figured out immortality.
And I loved the idea too, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about, how this episode is applicable, how many billions of dollars is the anti-aging industry making off of us every year. And one of the details in that story that Walter tells is, he's like, yeah, it cost a ton of money. He's like, but of course I gave it to him, this old alchemist thousands of years back. Which is what we do, which is what these anti-aging creams that are probably just the same thing as Cetaphil lotion. But people are so afraid of growing old and looking old and having their hands look like Sam was pointing out Walter's hands didn't look, that they'll pay anything. The plastic surgery industry is a $1 billion industry. And because people are so afraid of these very real things that Walter and Sam were both afraid of. And as much as I love Sam, and this is why I think that Walter is more tragic than despicable, is Sam is like, I want this. He's look at me, I'm 71 years old or whatever. He's like, I don't have much time left. And he has a 30-year-old daughter, but, he's saying all these things, and Walter is trying to talk him out of it. He's like, you don't want it. And one of the best lines in this entire episode is, let me find exactly what it was. Shoot. Oh, Walter says to him, it's death that gives this world its point. We love a rose because we know it'll soon be gone. Whoever loved a stone. And I loved that line so much. And Sam's reaction to it, he's like, but I'm not a stone and I'm not a rose. I'm a human. I'm an old human. I don't want to die. And Walter's whole thing was like, yes, you do want to die. I don't watch any of those vampire movies, but I assume that that's the tragedy of what's his name, Edward from Twilight, is that he's so lonely because everyone he knows the second he meets someone that he has a connection with, that he's going to outlive him.
Well, that's a classic tragedy of, so many movies and books where somebody is immortal, is that idea of outliving him. I did make a note. My mom is a huge Twilight fan. And we have absorbed some of that by osmosis, seeing all the stuff. And well, actually I haven't seen most of the movies, but, the first one was so terrible I didn't want to continue on, but, we read the books, and I made a note of that really early on in the episode, because one of the things I think is interesting about that is, and this is going to bring us back into Jameson, because he in some ways is fortunate the age he's kind of frozen at, because one of the things that comes up in the Twilight series with several of them who are like vampires who are teenagers is you can't hang around one place very long, because people notice you don't age, and Sam noticed that Walter didn't age over 12 years when he was already an adult. Imagine if you saw somebody who's like 14 and 12 years later still looks 14. That's way more suspicious. So they have this challenge that they can't really stay anywhere and form these connections, and can't do some of the things you might like to do. Like they talk about, learning, and he's, graduated from high school a cajillion times in Twilight. But what might be really nice is go do like a graduate program or something, like expand on that learning you've gotten, but you can't if you're that, if you look like you're 12, I mean, he doesn't look like he's 12, but if you look like you're 16, you can't continually pass off as 30 and not aging and stuff. So, and I thought how old you look when you're immortal, I think actually would make a really big practical difference. And in that sense, Walter was lucky. And
Walter even brings that up to Sam. He's like, when would you want to freeze yourself? In your 30s? He's like, would you want to freeze yourself now? Do you want to feel this way that you're feeling all the time right now?
Well, and wait a second. You're making Walter much nicer than he is, because I was going to mention this when you said that Sam wants to be. He's like, you want to be frozen now when you're old and sick? And he's like so condescending towards Sam. I wanted Sam to like smack him.
I totally disagree that he was being condescending. He was basically saying you want to live with all these aches and pains that you have at 71 years old for eternity. And I also, in what you're saying before, it's been a very long time since I've seen it, but Interview with a Vampire, wasn't that one of the tragedies of why Kirsten Dunst, why they took her when they took her early, why I think Tom Cruise was pissed about it, or whoever was pissed about it, because it wasn't fair that she was a kid essentially when they made her a vampire.
That might be right. I mean, I haven't seen that movie and I don't even know how long. I know, later in the Twilight series, there is something that comes up about like turning like essentially babies or very young children into vampires, and that's like a forbidden sort of thing because of that. There was another great line that, while we're in that same conversation that, Walter had, where he says, I've been close to death many times, but never close enough. I just really dug that. Like, cause normally that's the thing, like, yeah, I've had a lot of close brushes with death and thankfully escaped them, and like spinning it the other way, like never quite got close enough to die.
For both that line and what you just mentioned before about when you would want to be frozen in time, I've mentioned this book before by Drew McGarry, The Postmortal. I'll link it again in the show notes. It's a great book. It's a very quick read, and it's about they cure dying. They just cure dying of old age, but you can still die. Like you can still do all of the things like and there's a great exchange between Sam and Walter when Sam's like, you never got injured in all that time. And Walter's like, some people are just lucky. Some people never get a broken bone or go to a hospital or all this stuff. And in Postmortal, you could still die from an accident, from cancer, from things like that, but they cured you of aging. So like you would never your cells wouldn't ever grow older. And so most people, I think the popular age was like 26, that people were freezing themselves to get this surgery to have this live immortally at this frozen age. And, I really thought, I love this episode. I'm going to be so sad when we rate this one.
So before you move on from that, I forget if it was last week or the week before, we were talking about whether our Googles and Facebooks and everything were listening in on us and these sort of coincidences that happen. So, I have to say, you had mentioned the Postmortal before. I had put it on my Amazon wish list. Amazon is now apparently listening so well that they knew ahead of time you were going to mention that, because today right before we started this podcast recording, I got an email from Amazon that says, here's a $5 credit we applied to your account to use on The Postmortal, a novel, a title on your wish list. So not only is it listening now, it knew ahead of time you were going to bring that back up today and that I would want to go buy it. And it's trying to encourage me.
It's predicting. While this made me think,
let's give Amazon some credit with their predictive algorithms, that they knew I was going to be recording a podcast today, probably from studying my Google Calendar. And they knew it was with you, and they knew you've recommended this before and were likely to recommend it again, perhaps during this recording. So it wanted that sitting in my inbox for me.
Maybe they listened to last week when you guessed that this was going to be about another person that found immortality.
They're like, oh, well, we know Bront's going to start talking about that book again.
But this made me think of another reason that I loved. So Sam was like a total detective in this. Like he was, and after the first class at the beginning that he sat in on, he goes up to Walter and he's like, some of the kids say that and he's giving Walter every opportunity to explain his way out of being immortal. He's like, some of the kids say that you're even there. Walter's literally reading from his own diary during the Civil War, which I thought was a super cool touch. And Sam's like, can I see that? And he lets him look at it. He's like, can I take it? And Walter's like, well, Sam, I don't loan books out to professors and all this stuff. And Sam's asking all these great questions. He's like, who is this person that we find out was Walter that fought in the Civil War? He's like, what regiment was he in? He's doing all the things that if you sat down to take out a girl for the first time, that the dad would probably grill you on. Like, what do you do for a living? And it was just because Sam was so suspicious of his non-aging. He's just trying to figure out if he actually is immortal. And there's a great, great, great moment where he actually just asks him, when there's a picture of these Civil War soldiers, and one of them is clearly Walter. And I loved his reaction because Sam goes, and of course Sam is playing hey, this can't be that he's actually immortal. What are the other explanations? And you know how much I love that in the Twilight Zone when they try and do that. And he goes, who was your grandfather in the Civil War? And there's a great moment, a great acting job by Kevin McCarthy. And he just kind of looks at him and he's like, you could almost feel the cold water wash over him. And he's just like, no. And cause his grandfather is thousands and thousands of years old. And there's this great moment where you see it in his eyes that Walter thinks that Sam is getting suspicious of him. I loved the pacing of this episode. I love the acting. I love this episode.
Well, Sam was doing the detective work that in many other Twilight Zone episodes people should have been doing. When just something bizarre happens, they're like, okay, sounds good to me.
Even
or
little
the monsters in Maple Street last time, where they're like, well, this kid said sometimes aliens invade and pretend to be us. All right, that's got to be the truth. Let's not do any work to see.
Even very minor things like the woman, his old ex-wife just appearing in his home made sense in the context because he had left the home, probably obviously left it unlocked. She was waiting outside the home. He went across the street for dinner, and when he came back,
which was very convenient for their production design that
true
Sam and Walter live across the street.
True and fine, but it made sense. All this episode made, other than the immortality, it made sense to me, and I really, really appreciated it. I thought this was great writing, frankly. Maybe the direction was, and I'm kind of surprised on the direction because I thought there were some really neat things. I liked when he did come back to his house and his ex-wife tries to surprise him and she's sitting in the dark and and I also love this moment when Walter said, I've got a gun. I'm a coward. I've got a gun in my desk that I pull out every night and try to will up the courage to kill myself. And so they set up the fact that there was going to be this gun in play. So it made perfect sense for his ex-wife to have it and shoot him. And he pulls it out. She like surprises him, and he takes his desk lamp and like turns it to her and shines it in her face. And it's kind of a jump scare moment because there's this old woman there that's just sitting in his desk.
Except that you knew it was going to be the old woman because she had been established earlier furtively hiding behind a tree.
For sure. But the light shining on her face was startling, I thought. And
no, that was a nice use of lighting.
And when she shoots Walter, I love that it wasn't this super dramatic. He was just like gut shot, and he's like leaning against this desk. Sam hears the shot from across the street, which I did look up and is actually feasible. And he comes running in, and he just goes, he's like, Walter, he's like, are you all right? And Walter just goes, I don't know. And I love, he's like, but it won't matter. You'll be rid of me one way or the other, because I'm either he doesn't say this, but he's either going to die, or he says, I've come to my senses, and he was going to not take Susanna. I love this episode.
Really? I had not noticed that.
I'm sad. I'm already filled with sadness when we get to rating this one, but go on.
When you talk, look, I didn't hate this episode. I feel like you're getting super upset anytime I mention anything that wasn't perfect about it. When you mentioned Sam like running over, like, yeah, it was cool. He hears the gunshot. There's this very bizarre production choice there where it like cuts over to Sam. They cut back to Walter for like a second and a half, like not long enough to see what's going on. Almost felt like a filler shot, and then back over to Sam. Like, wait, why was there like this little half a shot in there? And there were just a lot of weird choices, like that. I want to go back to, it's two things. One about the sort of pacing of the reveal, because I love the pacing of the acting, their conversation. This was a very conversation driven episode. Probably, half of the total episode is, Sam and Walter
philosophizing.
Yeah. And it actually worked. Like we've seen some other episodes where there's just like these long conversations of exposition just because they need to get information in, and they were actually talking about something. And so that worked. I did think it was super obvious early on that he was immortal. I wrote during the voiceover, okay, so Jameson is long lived and actually was at the Civil War. He's reading his own diary, and it's an interesting premise. This is the first time I was watching it. It wrote an interesting premise that could play out in a lot of different ways. I'm curious if the show will try to keep it a secret for a long time, which some of the episodes have, where we like get ahead of the episode, or if they'll kind of reveal that early and move on to something more interesting. And they kind of split the difference, like, because we watch Sam doing the detective work to figure out what we already know. But by the midpoint of the episode, he sort of admitted he's immortal, and then we get to these more interesting conversations. I also guessed right at that point, is the end of the episode going to be Kittredge finding an old photo of the regiment and seeing Jameson's face in it? And it turns out that wasn't the end. That's like 9 minutes in. But so I think, I just want to say, I think a lot of, maybe what you're talking about foreshadowing, but a lot of it was like super predictable. So the foreshadowing, like, yes, there's lots of elements already in there because we know what's going on with it.
I guess maybe, I'm sorry, just to address that. I guess foreshadowing is not I know that that's an actual artistic device. I guess foreshadowing is not really what I'm saying, but like things like setting up. I think
you're talking about setup and payoff.
Yeah, setup and lots of setup and payoff. Like the fact that we knew that there was the gun in his desk, and then we see it used. Like we knew, and knowing that he had wives, and then one of his wives showed up. Just even seeing the old woman waiting outside of his house, leaning against the tree, waiting for him to leave. Like I thought, yes. Setup and payoff is a way better description of it.
And this is one I think you could go either way on, because I like setup and payoff, and that's generally something you always want to try to do in writing. I felt like this one, everything was so telegraphed that you saw the setup and like, okay, I immediately know how this is going to pay off. Like as soon as he's reading from the diary, you're like, okay, we're going to see a picture of him when he was in the Civil War, because that's the appropriate screenwriting payoff for this setup. And so there was a lot of setup and payoff. I just thought a lot of them were so obvious that it kind of started to feel like paint by numbers in terms of those elements. I love their conversation. And I want to spin us in a different direction for a second. There was one interesting thing I thought about, that this is a problem anything about immortality would deal with. So this isn't specific to this episode. But this idea of like, if you really live forever and you're sort of existing in society in all these times, the problem is humanity itself has changed, and you can adapt culturally and, if assuming you're flexible enough, sort of change your perceptions on things and keep up with society, but just physically, like 2,000 years ago, Jameson would have been like 1.5 feet taller than anyone else.
True.
Because he's still like, he's a good head taller than Sam at this point. And that's after, that's in a society with good nutrition and good healthcare. And it just struck me. And this isn't something I would blame the show for, because it's sort of an inherent issue with this idea of immortality. But there's, probably a long period of time, let's say 400 or 500 years, maybe, 800 years, that you could live and kind of fit in. But at some point you're going to physically have been left behind by the changes in the population, or, you would have had to start so far ahead of everyone you wouldn't have fit in at that time if you're going to fit in later. I just thought it was an interesting question to me, because as soon as he's like, yeah, I knew Plato personally, I'm like, he's like 6'5". That doesn't seem like what the ancient Greeks were.
Yes. And you always get on my case when I do point out something like that. And you're like, well, it is a Twilight Zone. So I'm just going to point out.
That's what I said. I'm not knocking the episode, but it's an interesting question that I don't think anyone's figured out a good solution for in terms of sci-fi writing.
And in regard to that Plato connection, I thought that was kind of neat too, that even though he knew Plato personally, that he still was like, didn't get any smarter, and he didn't get any, like, he was very philosophical and very thoughtful, but like he was the same person despite having all of this time to absorb. It's like time enough at last. All this time to absorb all this knowledge. He's like, but I'm still the same. Like, I feel like if I ever got the opportunity to live forever, I'd be like, yep, now I'm just still sitting around playing video games and like watching movies and doing the same shit. Like that's not going to make me write like the next great novel or cure cancer or do any of that stuff. If I'm not working toward that now, being immortal is not going to make me work toward that anymore. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, I agreed. I thought that was a really interesting one.
Can I point out a cool tidbit of trivia? Unless you have something directly. So in the IMDb trivia section, this whole episode is obviously about immortality. The entire cast of this episode, Kevin McCarthy lived to be 96. Estelle Winwood was 101 when she died, and Edgar Stelly died right after he turned 89, and Dottie Heath turned 90 in 2018. I don't know if she's still alive.
They had a pretty good run.
That's pretty impressive. And that's kind of one of those creepy, like, oh, that's weird that they were all in this episode about living forever and that all of them lived exceptionally long lives.
It would have been even weirder if they all had lived forever.
That's true. If they were all still alive. We need a UHF reboot, so I'm sad that Kevin McCarthy is not still alive.
I know, and that's funny. That's one of those things we talk about with the Twilight Zone where, what things hold up or don't. I bet the kids at this point wouldn't even know what UHF is. Like, that's just random letters. There's no connection. Yeah. You have no idea what that even means or relates to TV, or like you wouldn't even know it relates to TV. You'd be like, okay, is that some kind of a computer connector, like USB, or
would they even know what a basic cable station or like a what do you call it? The public cable or public access channel would even be? I don't think those even exist anymore, do they? Maybe, I guess they do.
I don't know. I don't know if those exist. I wonder if just from things like, this is also, now 25 to 30 years old, but like Wayne's World, like I feel like that was more in 25. That's kind of still in the public consciousness. So maybe if you didn't know that was a real thing, you kind of get the idea. Yeah,
good point.
I don't know. The comment I wanted to make, going back and thanks for bringing up that note about them all living a long time. So there's hope for all of us to have a long life. If we don't get killed by COVID-19.
Yeah, true.
We've talked about Philip Dick a few times. And I'm actually, so we're in the process of moving. So I have like stacks of books all over because we haven't moved our bookshelves, but we've moved all our books. And, it's been kind of fun because I'm like rereading some stuff that had gotten like in the back of the shelf and I hadn't seen in a while. And I'm rereading a Philip Dick short story anthology. I love his short stories.
Yeah.
But something we had talked about in the past that I think is also related to many of the Twilight Zone episodes is that they're more about the ideas than about the specific characters and execution of them. And in fact, as I've been rereading this, I've been super conscious of this, and also based on some of our recent Twilight Zone episodes, super conscious of the gender issues in Philip Dick, which are far worse than what we've seen in Twilight Zone thus far. So let's throw that out there as something else worth considering. And Dick was, writing well over a longish period of time, but some of it would have been, I think, contemporary with Twilight Zone. But the particular anthology I'm reading has this really fascinating introduction by another sci-fi writer. And I'm going to paraphrase because it's like pages long, but basically says we're all indebted to Dick for coming up with these really interesting ideas and not really executing them all that well, because it gives all of us something to like take and build off of. Like, so it was kind of like a backhanded compliment, which was really interesting to have as the introduction to this book. But he's right. And the comments he was making are like, he brings up these really fascinating ideas and really makes you think, but he doesn't create good characters around them or like kind of follow them through to all their implications. Like, here's a cool idea, I'll write 20 pages on it. And then other people have often taken those and done more interesting things with them. And I think, some of the better movies we've seen come out of Philip Dick's work have often been the ones where they made the biggest changes to it. And the ones that have kind of the most slavishly tried to stick to the book have not been terribly successful. Anyhow, I'm
anecdotally agreeing with that because I haven't watched the series of it yet, but I did read them, or I slogged through The Man in the High Castle. I did not enjoy the book at all. And I heard the series is one of the better series that's been sci-fi series, especially that's been released recently.
Yeah. And, I did not even make it through the book. I like trying.
Yeah. It's not good. I don't think it's good.
Well, and look, I know Philip Dick has written some very important things and obviously things that have gone on to be adapted into really good stuff. But I think I'm right there. I was right there with this introduction. And what I love reading of Dick are his short stories, because it's 10 pages and the characters are one dimensional and you don't care because it's really just like, wow, that was a fascinating idea or a cool twist. And I'm willing to invest 10 pages in that where I'm not willing to invest 400 pages.
And the one I'm like with that, I couldn't make it through A Scanner Darkly. And again, I haven't seen the adaptation of that, the animated thing, but I heard that was also very interesting and I could not make it through the book.
So bring this back to the Twilight Zone. What struck me, so I think where I've brought up Dick before is we've made these comments about some of the Twilight Zone episodes that are really sort of like a premise and like, well, there it was. And there's not a whole lot more interest. What I liked about this one is this was about immortality, and there's, the extended philosophical discussion in the middle about that and the pros and cons of immortality, basically largely cons they're talking about. But it really is about these specific characters, and it's a character driven piece. As you mentioned, Sam more concerned with protecting his daughter or whether it would be good for him to be immortal than like the mechanics of how do you become immortal that a lot of sci-fi stuff might get, bogged down in. And I really appreciated that. And I thought this was one of the better episodes at having an interesting idea and getting those interesting ideas out there through this conversation in the middle, but keeping it driven by the characters and their motivations instead of just here's an idea. Good. I think I'm starting to sway you. No, that was what I thought from the get-go. I think if I gave this anything less than an A+, you were going to be like, you bastard. Yes, this is the best episode.
I am. So one thing I wanted to ask you if you knew how they did it. So I thought the aging shots for Walter. So first of all, this reminded me of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yep.
Another Walter Donovan, when he drinks from the wrong grail, has this great, it frankly looks very cheesy now, but has this aging moment where he just ages these thousands of years.
Yeah, then he becomes like a puppet head with like the hair shooting out of it
exactly.
and stuff. Yeah.
So there was a need. I thought he looked very, as Walter was aging in this episode, I apologize for my dog. I can't stop talking. Looked very horrifying, like as he was aging. I thought that it was a really neat job that they did with that. And I know how they did this because I looked in the trivia, but I was wondering if you either cheated and looked in the trivia or if you had any thoughts on that.
I did not cheat and look at the trivia. I did note that I thought it was really cool. And, there's the first shot is really to me, the kind of best one where he starts kind of looking pretty normal and we start to see him age and the wrinkles and stuff coming in. I thought was really cool. And then they get away with something here. I don't actually mean that in a negative sense. Like, this is smart filmmaking. If you just started with him young, cut away to Sam and cut back to him and now he's older, like, oh, they're just changing the makeup every time. They started showing him getting older, so we're sort of like seeing him get older in the shot, and now you can cut away to Sam and cut back to him and now he's even older, and they do that a few times, and in the later ones he keeps getting progressively older in each one. But they've already established, even though those later ones are just a gimmick of cutting away and then like changing the makeup and that sort of stuff in between, because that first shot worked and we saw some progression, it doesn't feel like cheating. So I thought it was really well executed. I did not look up how they did it.
Do you want me to tell you? It's pretty cool.
Sure.
So
can I make a guess? And since
absolutely.
I did not look stuff up. So, and I would also say this is something that we've seen some other times where they have effects that are, what they wanted to do with the effect was sort of beyond either the capabilities of the time or the capabilities of their budget to actually do.
Like the Four of Us Are Dying.
Where they really needed morphing instead of just doing superimpositions, or some of the like cheesy rocket ship effects where like they needed some CGI.
Like Elegy.
And instead they just had, I don't know, somebody's 5-year-old kid did a quick little animation. And this was one where, it was very clear when he looks at his hand, he's like, oh, he's going to be aging, like, oh, this would be cool if they like show him aging through these years. And I actually thought, I'm like, I wonder how they're going to do that, because they don't really have the technology to full on do it. The way you might do it today is a combination of makeup, CG, combining shots together and really progressing through this. So my guess on what they did for that first shot, and it's just a guess, I didn't look it up, but I thought it looked really good, was that it was one or both of, some combination of him staying still and a little bit of superimposition of just parts of the shot, and a change in lighting that he had some makeup that was like, depending on where the lighting was coming from, was more or less visible. Those were my guesses.
You just about nailed it. So it's as practical as that. So I'm just going to read this from the trivia section from IMDb. Kevin McCarthy's transformation from a middle-aged to an old man on screen without any cutaways was accomplished by applying red-colored age makeup to McCarthy's face and then lighting the set with red key lights, which disguised the age makeup. As the scene progressed, the red key lights were gradually replaced with green lighting, a change imperceptible to the black and white film in which the scene was shot, but which made McCarthy's face appear to age spontaneously, something that normally couldn't be done with early 1960s technology without taking the camera off the actor for at least a brief cutaway. I thought that was super cool that they figured out a way to do that. So, and great guess. You were with the lighting. That was basically the idea.
Well, that's also how they do in, like, you can get away with some things in black and white you can't with colors. Like if you're doing day for night shooting, it's a lot easier to do in black and white because you can just put a filter on that like cuts out the blue and suddenly the sky is dark. I mean, and there's other things you have to do with the lighting and stuff there, but you can't get away with that in color.
And that's what we saw in Last Testament. Those battle scenes, I think, were very clearly shot in the day, but they were made to look like they were at night, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool. No, that was a neat effect. And I liked how I liked how that whole last scene kind of played out. In particular, I like when they come back and there's his empty suit with just the dust in it.
Yes.
Which leads into the voiceover, which maybe is where we're headed here. But
sure.
The last shot of him before that, I'm like, well, he still looks really good for being over 2,000 years old. Like we don't really have, like, cause we don't know, like what would a 2,000-year-old person look like? We don't have any reference to that because we're like, okay, we know you get more wrinkled as you age and, you know, skin dries out and your hair changes, but like we don't have any reference like, oh, let's go look at a 2,000-year-old person and see what they look like compared to when they were young. But he still looked, I thought, really good for 2,000 years old. He looked like he was like 110.
And 2,000 plus. He was at least 2,000 years old.
Because he knew Plato, and I looked up Plato was about 2,400 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And I'm glad that they paid that off with that. in that last scene too, another thing that I thought that Susanna was kind of better. Two things. I love the relationship between Sam and Susanna, because he immediately tried to protect her when he saw what was going on with Walter. He closed, we heard Susanna coming in. He closes the door and tries to intercept her. And kudos to Susanna, who pushes past her father and gets into the room and sees this suit just filled with dust. I thought it was great. So, but that's about all I've got on it. If you, because I assume I'm going to have to defend this episode to get your rating high enough. But, are you ready for the closing narration?
Well, I think I am. I'll just say I have some critiques of the camera work I would make. Okay. I can save those for later because I don't want to end on a negative note in terms of our discussion, because I did like this episode. I like the story and the philosophy of it a lot. But since I have a feeling I might have to talk you down a little bit, can I run through some of those?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so just kind of like going in order of some of the weird camera things that showed up. Opening shot of the classroom, the first time we see Jacobs, or I keep wanting to call him Jacobson.
Same with me.
Who's Walter Jacobson?
He was a news anchor, wasn't he? Isn't that Walter Jacobson?
I don't know.
I'll look him up. You keep talking.
Anyway, Walter Jameson, there's this nice start to the shot where we sort of push in. We're from looking at the classroom from outside, and the camera kind of tracks in, and then just got to the point where they couldn't move the camera anymore and just started zooming in. And zooms really tend to draw your attention and like be noticeable as a zoom. And it was weird that it like was this track, and then you could tell they just sort of ran out of ability to track and switched to a zoom. I thought that was distracting and unnecessary. There's a really weird insert showing the pages of the diary, and it's like when he's reading from the Civil War diary, and it's like flat aimed right at the camera. And it reminded me a little bit of the beginning of some of the classic Disney animation where they have like the storybook opening and you see what's inside and the start of this. But it was unnecessary. There's no need for us to see that it's a diary. We believe it. And what we should have been looking at was either Jameson reading, or more likely at his class being raptly interested. Because that's part of the point of this, is he is such a, he's famous for bringing the history alive, which I did not think his lecture was terribly riveting. But that could have been a time like and instead they cut this in, which is telling us there's something important there to look at, and there's not. And it's only there for like a second, and then it sort of gets pulled away out of the camera. We're staring at like a blank screen for a half a second before they cut to the next shot. That was weird and random. And
I agree. Whenever they show text on screen, I'm trying to read the text and see if it goes along with that's why subtitles, when it's in the language that I'm reading, kind of drive me nuts, because I'm reading ahead of the actor actually delivering what's going on.
And I was looking for the text he was saying. I didn't see it. It might have been on a different part of the page. I didn't read the whole thing, but again, like, then why were you showing us?
Yeah, it was distracting. I agree with that.
Around 8 minutes in, there's a very weird cut. It's when Jameson and Sam are both at the table where they were playing chess. And I think it's right before Sam gets up and goes to pick up the volume of photos. And the film people out there will get this, that it breaks the 30-30 rule. And basically it was like two shots that are close enough to each other that you shouldn't be cutting between them. But it was like they didn't get the right camera angles of coverage, and so they were just sort of stuck with it. And it just looks sloppy, and like they weren't planning ahead when they were shooting.
I thought you were going to point out that it was super weird that they had a cloche covering their chess game.
I really like that. I don't know why. I just thought it was fun. Like, sort of like protects it from getting knocked over or whatever.
But it was like this very like wispy, like lace cloche. But anyhow. Sorry, go ahead.
Then we have the Civil War photo, which they show a couple times, and the first time they like leave it blurry for no reason. Like, we can see that it's like clear enough to see that it's him, but like not crystal clear. And then they cut back to it, and it's this super crystal clear shot of him, and they hang on it for a while, and then they just start zooming in on it in this super cheesy way right before the commercial break with another like dun 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 sort of thing.
Was the second time though when he had it under the magnifying glass? Could that explain the reason that they was clear the second time and muddy the first time?
It was through the magnifying glass both times. I think one time it was like, where it seemed to be intentional that they didn't want us to quite get the reveal the first time. And then we get it the second time, but we knew that's what it was. And if you don't want us to see it, don't show it clearly enough that we can tell it's him. Right. It was like this thing like where
good point.
I talk a lot in class about like making strong choices. Like, sometimes, whether it's the right choice or not, you could go A or you could go B. And where you get into trouble is when you try to go halfway between A and B. Like, make your decision and go with it.
Same thing with improv.
Right. I mentioned some weird editing after the shot between that. There are a couple other weird shots when they're in there having their conversation on the couch. So again, like, none of this has to do with the story, but it was like an episode that to me was distractingly badly shot.
Okay. I'm glad that that's your reason for
shot / edited.
Okay. So you ready for closing narration?
I put the blame on the director, because in TV, the director's job is to make sure you get the shots that you're going to need to edit together. And there were a couple of places where it really seemed like they didn't have the shot, which reminded me a little bit of, remember the one in, it was Elegy, where there's like the weird freeze frame of the two guys on the bridge. Yes. And you're like, why is that? And I was explaining, well, they forgot to get the shot they needed, and they sort of grabbed this from a piece of another shot and pushed in and freeze framed it. I felt like probably the editor here was working with the same thing. Like, I don't quite have the right shots. Like, let's see what I can do to kind of make things cut together well enough.
Well, and just so you're aware, Tony Leader, Anton Leader, he directed this. He directed one other episode that we haven't seen yet. That's going to be, it looks like, next season in 1961. So
we'll see if he redeems himself. But I think they should have given this to John Brahm.
Maybe if he goes as Anton instead of Tony, he'll be a better director.
That was the problem. Maybe it was the director from World of Difference showed up to direct this episode, and he isn't actually a director. He's just like a mob person pretending to be a director.
Yes.
And I don't know.
Could be.
Let's go to the closing narration, because there's obviously something we want to talk about there too.
Oh, and since we were, yes, totally. And since we were, by the way, going back to our sort of opening, the writer of this, Charles Beaumont, his name popped up. It was familiar to me. He wrote 22 total episodes. The ones we've seen are Perchance to Dream and Elegy, and then this one. And then there's going to be a bunch more. But anyhow.
I would say of those three, I thought this was far and away the most interestingly written.
Agreed. Okay. So our closing narration. Last stop on a long journey as yet another human being returns to the vast nothingness that is the beginning and into the dust that is always the end. Doesn't mention the Twilight Zone at all.
It doesn't. And didn't you? I kind of like it that, and I think there's only one other we've seen that didn't end with in the Twilight Zone.
The Four of Us Are Dying.
Which was not a favorite episode of ours.
No.
But so it's not just that was missing, but didn't this feel like there was like going to be one more sentence? And maybe it's just because I'm kind of used to the rhythms of how these ending narrations go. But I liked what he said, but I felt like it needed a little bit.
I agree. And especially since like the last closing narration was one of my favorites, I think, of all time. I agree. I think this was it did need another, and even as I was cutting and pasting it into my notes to be able to read it, it's not long enough. It's not there is that rhythm to it. And maybe he could have shoehorned in a Twilight Zone reference in there. But yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, because it's only the second one that did not mention the Twilight Zone.
Okay, so I'm going to rewrite it live. So last stop on a long journey as yet another human being returns to the vast nothingness that is the beginning and the end. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, on earth as in the Twilight Zone.
I like it.
All right, so let's get the same actors back, same script.
They're all probably still alive.
we're just going to change up the camera angles and the ending narration a little bit.
And we'll fix it. Okay. So are we ready to rate?
We're going to shoot it in black and white and do that same cool makeup effect at the end.
Cool. I love it. Ready to rate the sweat?
Yeah, I'm going to add my mirror rating that I've been saying I was going to do, because there was a great use of a mirror here where there's a mirror off screen that Walter walks up and is looking in, and then Sam walks up behind him and is looking at Walter in the mirror, and the camera's from the mirror's perspective. That was a nice choice. So they're like both looking toward us, but looking at his face. And then when it cuts to the reverse, we see they were staring at a mirror. I thought that was cool.
I will agree to replace sweat level with mirror rating, but I'm not doing sweat level plus mirror rating. But go ahead. Tell us what you think.
Sweat level, I didn't really notice much. Maybe 2.
Oh, I didn't notice any. I had a 1.
I'm fine with 1.
Okay. And rating. Do you want to go
I'm pretty
first?
Sure you're going to be like 7 out of 5.
Yeah, this was, so our only perfect score that we've had before is Judgment Night. as a 5. And to me, this was a 5. Like this was I think it was the best acting. I did not get caught up in the detail, like the technical details. And I'm sure that that's super annoying when you're able to notice those things. That's just not my world. I thought this was the best writing, the most, frankly, not even the most interesting story, but the most paid off story in a 25-minute episode that I've seen so far. It had, I think, my favorite character so far, outside of maybe, one for the Angels. What's his name? The pitchman. I forget his name.
Ed Bookman.
Ed Bookman. Thank you. In Sam, so I thought he was great. I thought that that's actually it had 2 stronger, for Twilight Zone standards, female characters in it. And I thought that this paid off super well. So I will be.
You're like a 3 or 3.5.
I'm a 5 with a bullet. This I might have even liked better than Judgment Night. I would maybe have to rewatch Judgment Night, but like this is my favorite episode by far so far. Not by far, but this is my favorite episode so far, I think.
Okay. And, much to, I guess, your surprise, because I think you kept thinking I hated this or something.
No.
I liked this episode a lot too. I liked the writing. I liked the philosophy they brought into it. I thought the conversation there was really good. I mentioned I thought the acting and the pacing was good.
So just say 5.
The production stuff I don't think is as important. We always talk about this, the story, if I'm telling my students, like, the best things you can do for your movie are get a good script and get good actors. And I think they did both of those things here.
I love that you bring it up though. Because that's the stuff that I knew. And frankly, because you bring up that stuff, I've started noticing stuff like that. And that's kind of gratifying for me to be like, oh, that's kind of a weird choice or a weird shot or a weird night filter or like a weird matte painting or whatever. And it's interesting to me to pick up on stuff like that. But yes, for sure.
If we had had John Brom directing this episode, when they crossed the street between the two, there would have been a matte painting of the rest of the street in the background.
True.
So those are 2 big things. And I say, so then all the other stuff we do, the sound design, the cinematography, the production design, all this other stuff, you're basically trying to not ruin your good script, or if you have a good script, push it into great, like make everything just really work and come through as well as it can. So that can't be the production stuff can't be the biggest factor. That said, I was distracted a bunch of times by the production not living up to the script and actually taking me out of it and distracting me from it.
Sure.
And the other thing is I liked the philosophy. I liked the stuff with it. I didn't find anything in it very surprising, maybe because there was everything that was set off paid off so well.
I agree with you. I do agree with you. I did feel like I knew what the ending was going to be early on, but and I've watched this episode, I think 4 times, but I was. So
especially the latter times you really knew who it was.
I was like, wait a minute, he dies at the end. But but there were little things that I think, additional things that I picked up on multiple viewings that were paid off that I thought were not subtle. But remember, we've talked about before in Twilight Zones where it's like, well, I think just even last episode where there was like something that was brought up that was never paid off or that meant nothing. And like,
wasn't it when he like was attacked went to the kid and the kid's like, that's the man, Mommy.
Right.
That's the man who
that's exactly
me.
what it was. Yeah. And talking about how the police never showed up to like confront him or anything. It's like, well, then what the hell was the point of this? And this.
Well, let's also remember in that episode, they had 20 minutes of him just running around.
Right.
Thinking he was somebody else and being told he wasn't repeatedly. So they needed something to fill out that time.
Right. And this was a little bit, I guess, too. And of course, all of this is going to be personal preference no matter what. Yes, there was one thing that was going to get paid off at the end of this that we kind of already knew what it was. But like, when you're reading a mystery novel that you know that the murderer is going to get caught at the end of it if the novel's worth a damn. But part of it was watching my interest in watching Sam figure this thing out. And oh God, I love this. Just give me a number, Mark. Just give me a number and then I'm going to talk you up.
Well, so you shouldn't have said that because if you're going to talk me up, I'm going to give you a lower number
don't
so I can get talked up too high.
I need best and final right now.
Negotiation. This was a 4.5 to me. I liked it a lot. I like the story. But when you say like Judgment Night is a 5, I'm like, Judgment Night, everything hit. And this was like, really good material that they didn't execute quite right.
Okay.
So
I can
I'm
maybe
go 4.5.
I could totally be down with this. Let me give you some other 4.5s. One for the Angels. I'd say this is on par with that. And When the Sky Was Opened, Third from the Sun, and The Last Flight.
Yeah. And I would say I actually liked, I think One for the Angels is a good comparison. We really liked that one, a lot.
And my second favorite character probably in Lou Bookman.
And I actually think this is a little bit better than a couple of those others. I don't think it's at the level of Judgment Night. So I feel good with a 4.5 for me.
I'm surprised you were able to talk me down that easily, but
I didn't even argue with it.
No, but I'm good with the 4.5. I'm a little surprised the Purple Testament it was a 4. I'm surprised that that's not also a 4.5, but we can't retcon these at this point. But Purple Testament's a 4.
Purple Testament lost half a star at the end
because
for that
of
ridiculous
that stupid
ending scene.
I agree.
And I feel like that was deserved.
Yeah, maybe. And then Time Enough at Last and 16mm Shrine were also 4s. Which I think, and Monsters Are Due on Maple Street was also a 4. So I'm glad that this is ahead of them. Although I really like the Purple Testament, I think too. So I'm surprisingly content with a 4.5. This, I think.
I'm surprised as well. I thought you were really going to push for the 5.
Can I convince you to go a 5? Because I think I like this episode equally to, if not better than I do love Judgment Night though, but I think this deserves a 5.
So here's what I would say too is, and I know we don't have an official, like what the rating scales each mean, but to me, like a 4.5 is a fantastic episode.
That's
for
sure.
That's like an A. Like the 5-star is like really reserved for the A+, like you did everything right. And
True.
That to me is where this is like, it's a really solid episode. I would absolutely recommend this to anybody as like I think this would be riveting to anybody, whether you're into the Twilight Zone or not, but it's not we're hitting on all cylinders. And again, I really wish John Brahm would have had this episode. I think he would have made it a 5.
Okay, I agree. But then my counter argument then is in Judgment Night, I actually noticed technical things like that matte painting and the stock footage, and it was a much more ambitious, I think, production in Judgment Night, obviously, than this that is just in 2 houses. So maybe that you can bump them up for faults from that. But if we're going on that scale, so, and kind of in the back of my head, and I think we've talked about this before, Mark, I know we've talked about this before, is when I'm thinking of a rating for these episodes, I'm like, how close to this is I'm going to hand this to someone and say, watch this. This will give you an idea of what the Twilight Zone is. And this to me ticked those boxes, that it was eminently watchable. Again, I watched it like 4 times. And it was
although
very
how many times
interesting.
you've watched it has not always seemed to correlate with how good it is. There was one that I remember.
It's just how much time I have.
We happened to be in a gap in recording, and maybe it was some episode you really hated, and you're like, and I watched it like 6 times.
I think it was like The Fever.
I hope
or something
it was
like
not
that.
The Fever.
Or I Shot an Arrow. I don't know. One of those. The 4 of Us Are Dying, maybe. I don't know. One of those bad ones. Or worse ones. So, but if I can talk you up to a 5, I'd be happy about it, but I would be content with a 4.5.
Yeah, look, I think we're splitting hairs here. We really liked this episode. It's definitely a highly rated. I think to me, the thing you mentioned about Judgment Night, I didn't find I didn't feel like those were unforced errors. I think they were things where they were trying to achieve more than they could on their budget and trying to find ways to work with it.
Yeah.
The bulk of this was set in a house and then a little bit in the house across the street. This is the kind of episode where, like, if you're a director, you should look at this and like, oh wow, like most of this is this one location. We dress that and we can really like dig our teeth into it instead of trying to like, okay, we got to create 18 different locations and we don't have the budget for this and how are we going to fake it and stuff. And so there's a much lower level of ambition in terms of what you need, which should allow you to knock it out of the park. I thought Judgment Night, one of the things that's really impressive is what they did on a TV budget.
Agreed.
So,
okay, I'll take a 4.5. It's one of our top episodes and I'm happy about that because I really liked it.
If you want to give it a 4 3/4, you can.
No, that's okay. I don't want to get that. Although if you would just go to a 10-point scale like we do on the Sweat, it would make it a lot easier. Okay. Mark, are you ready to guess what next week's episode is about?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good at least getting relatively close on this one after several major misses. Well, I guess
that one out of the park.
Monsters on Maple Street, but that one I feel like we had a pretty good sense just from the fact that it was circulating with the COVID-19 stuff. So,
and Google was beaming articles about it into our brain. And listen
I just
to Google
heard your
beep
Google
right when I said
go
that. I know. Of course, it's always listening.
I don't have any
Oh no.
information about that.
Okay, so next week's episode, Mark, is People Are Alike All Over. People are alike all over.
That sounds like a PSA title.
They're like an after school special.
Right? People are alike all over. I'm going to guess astronauts land on a planet and find it's just like Earth.
Good guess. I like that.
I feel like there needs to be some twist. I feel like that would be obvious right at the beginning, but
no, that's good. I like that guess. And you guys can find out. Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. As we said, next week's episode is episode 25 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled People Are Alike All Over. You can watch it on US Netflix. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. And you can find us at DejaReview.com. You can find all of our social media stuff, or you can leave us a voicemail or a text message, and we would love to have you do that. We hope you tune in next week.
Deja Review.